Yo, man, can you see the mics, man?
Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, I don't know how to say this, but I believe Hypnotoad deserves better than whatever the hell TCU did tonight.
Oh, yeah. The fact that they referenced Hypnotoad in the pregame broadcast only for TCU to do all of that, that is frankly disrespectful.
Yeah, it's sad. And but you know, Notre Dame is happy that they're going to be scrubbed off of the worst waxing in a championship game. So
yeah, well, it's both Notre Dame and I think who did Nebraska beat? Was that the Notre Dame team? Because like it depends on how you define national championship game, but I think it's let's see, yeah, Florida. That's it.
yes,
Florida. So if you just use all bowl games where number 1 and number 2 played each other and count that as a national championship game, the biggest was Nebraska over Florida, 62-24. Quick math listeners, don't know a better way to say that, will understand that point differential to be 38 points. That's in line with the biggest blowouts in history. USC Oklahoma 2004 was 36. Florida State, that's a 3-1, so I guess you wouldn't count that, but it's a national championship game, I guess. Would be 32 points, 52-20 in 1996. Clemson, Alabama, 2018, 28. So 38 is pretty normal. Georgia TCU, which I guess is a number 3, but national championship game, 65-7. Quick math listeners will understand that to be 58 points.
yeah, and this thing is still going as of the moment it's final. It is done.
It's final. Yeah, they stopped scoring after 65. There was like 4.5 minutes left, I think, when I checked, and it was 65-7. The problem is TCU did not start scoring. That was the bigger concern with that one.
Like, I had no desire to watch the game. I had no desire to watch TCU get waxed. And yeah, that was and apparently I didn't miss anything. So we're just going to move on from that and welcome you to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. The Vikings won. They beat a terrible Bears team. Lauren Cox was not lying when he said that this was going to be ugly and that Nathan Peterman was going to get benched.
That was a incredible prediction. I mean, I guess he kept on treating it like it was pretty normal, but I think that required a little bit of foresight. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Nathan Peterman comes back in the game. That I don't think anyone expected.
I like that there was an over-under on the third string quarterback number of passes, and then he surpassed it, and then Peterman came back out.
And then Peterman came back.
Like, the Bears fans have suffered enough. Well, Bears lost. Vikings won. They will be hosting the Giants on Sunday afternoon. More importantly, this game basically meant nothing. However, the Lions beat the Packers in spectacular fashion on Sunday night, and we will be talking about that. We will be getting a good laugh in at the Packers, so stick around for that, and then we have the mailbag as well. But before we start, again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to support us, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there for $3.50 a month. You get access to stuff like the bonus material. The second Christmas episode was released, technically the New Year's episode, was released over to the Patreon people, so check that out. It's basically like the one that you got for Christmas, but it's different and has new stuff in it, including the beginning of the interview that Arif conducted with Justice that had me do a literal spit take at the computer.
I'm going to have to download it so I knew what it said.
I'd even tweeted, I think, not tweeted, I think I'd even messaged you after. It was like, okay, so the good news is I wiped off the computer. And it's, and it's fine. But, so check that out. End of the month, I'm also putting another year-end retrospective. and some new stuff in there as well. So again, if you enjoy the Christmas episode, head over to Patreon and get another, and one more at the end of January. So check that out. It's a good time over there. Plus, you get access to the Discord, where you can have fantastic names like we'll be reading off later. Also, you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well if you'd like to give just a one-time donation. Or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and be one of the fine people who sent Jeremy Reisman a sticker of a wreath. So I support this idea. He seems to be big into stickers now. He is selling his own by himself. Meanwhile, our podcast, which doesn't have nearly as confusing a name as theirs does, we can have them over at norsecode.threadless.com.
Yeah, I'm going to go to podcast.threadless.com and podcast.threadless.com. And I'm going to guess it's not a Detroit Lions podcast themed merchandise. It's not loading, so that's good news. Okay. Podcast Entertainment Network. Never heard of them. But it certainly does not have anything to do with the Detroit Lions.
It does not. Sorry, Dusty had just messaged saying, not looking good for my TCU plus 60. He's not wrong. What an absolute disaster. Special thank you over on Patreon to Lego Sam for upgrading his membership. Thank you so much. It is greatly appreciated. Let's get into a brief review of the Bears game. This was basically the fourth preseason game, so we're not going to break it down in extraordinary detail. This was a game where Kirk Cousins played the first half. This was a game where CJ Ham had like 47 yards, which while I appreciated,
one of those games.
It was one of those, which while I appreciated more than most, is indicative of what this game was, which was a Bears defense that decided they were absolutely not going to be a historical footnote today in terms of Justin Jefferson, and were triple teaming him while leaving KJ Osborne open all first half.
Hooray.
What a lovely mess. I mean, there's not as much to go over here as you would with a typical game, but the Vikings showed up, and for the first time in what feels like forever, they didn't have the craziest game of the weekend. This was pretty normal.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I mean, the fact that they benched a guy and then benched the guy that they benched him for, if that's maybe even the right way to put it, was pretty dumb and interesting. But certainly the most exciting game was the last one.
By far. I mean, you don't just see some sort of a bubble screen hook and ladder play.
I've never heard of that. And like, why not, right? Like, why shouldn't that work, right? But like, what?
The next team that tries that, it's going to fail so hard.
Oh, it's a fumble 6. That's what that is.
Somebody's going to try that on some 2-point conversion, and it's going to go. It's going to end up being 2 points the other way. Like, it's going to be so funny.
Yeah,
well,
it's incredible. Yeah.
Let's talk about this and kind of some season end stuff before we get into like the playoffs. Justin Jefferson wore the wrong shoes for Green Bay. Played kind of a half of this one. As a result, does not make it to 2,000, but does eclipse 1,800, which is still statistically important for him. He's still increasing. 14, 16, and now 1,800.
Logically 2,000 is next.
It would stand to reason that if he is healthy, he's basically unstoppable at this point. Justin Jefferson, he is going to get just the biggest paycheck this offseason, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I can't imagine him not setting a receiver record, right? Because, I mean, obviously you've got the expansion of the salary cap. So the pure dollars is going to be more than we've ever seen. That, and he's probably going to end up. So the Vikings are going to try to pay him as soon as they can, which I believe starts in March. I don't think it starts actually now, even though I saw a couple of tweets saying, hey, you can start paying him now. I don't think so, but, why not? They're going to try and pay him as quickly as possible. so that they can keep the number down as much as possible, because the longer it is, the more any potential long-term market heats up for Jefferson, the more that he has got the ability to consider doing stuff like holding out or holding in, I guess is what players do now because they want to avoid the training camp fines. Another piece of leverage that was lost in the most recent round of negotiations. All of that, right? Like they want to avoid all of that, get it done as quickly as possible. And they don't want other receivers to help set the market, which the good news for the Vikings is that the free agency market, which might help determine what Jefferson's extension is going to look like, is extremely weak. I believe the best receiver on the market is Jakobi Meyers. So the numbers there are probably not going to be like, oh my God, Christian Kirk set the receiver market, and now every receiver contract after that is going to be wild because every agent's going to be like, well, you don't think my guy is better than Christian Kirk? Which, by the way, the Jaguars got the last laugh on that one. But like, you know, in the offseason, that was kind of the thing. That's when Jefferson signs his deal, it's probably not going to go that way, right? No agent's going to be able to turn to their team and be like, what, you don't think DJ Moore is as good as Justin Jefferson? Like, no, we don't. What are you talking about? This has nothing, no correlation. This has nothing to do with that. Yeah, that's the hope, right? Because otherwise, there's going to be some big receiver contracts, and that's going to bump up the Jefferson number. And you know how you view it depends on what your priorities are. But Jefferson has given up negotiating leverage a couple of times, very softly, not like it's going to really impact his take home all that much, but he's given up a little bit of his negotiating leverage by talking about how he doesn't really care that much about the money situation. So we'll see, but it's going to be a lot because his agent very much does care about the money situation. In fact, he is paid to care about the money situation. This is one job.
Quite
and Jefferson
literally,
has otherwise, yeah, exactly. And otherwise, Jefferson has monetized his brand extremely well, regardless. So, you know, clearly he cares a little bit about money. So yeah, that's going to be big. The 1,800 yards, seventh player in NFL history to get to 1,800 yards. I know that there are people that, not as many as I thought actually, but there have been people here and there that have been like, well, 17 game season, it's not as impressive. And it's like, well, okay, but like 16 game season, not as impressive. We had 14 game seasons, if people don't remember. And you know, OJ Simpson, now famous for other things. I'm of course referring to his acting career. You know, first guy to get 2,000 yards in a 14 game season, right? So, from a yards per game perspective, Jefferson is up there with the elites. And then, of course, if you do it over a 3-year span, Jefferson is up there with the elites. If you do it over a 4-year span, without Jefferson even having a 4th year, he's up there with the elites. We've covered that in previous episodes. But yeah, he is going to get an enormous sum of money. The question is whether or not the percentage that he gets, or rather the number he gets, what percentage of the cap that'll be, because that'll be fun to compare to people like, you know, Calvin Johnson or DeAndre Hopkins, or Devontae Adams even, people who kind of broke the percentages for receivers in the market. That's going to be the interesting part.
This is going to be fun to see, because I don't know of a Vikings fan out there who's going to say, no, that's unreasonable.
Yeah, what number would make a Vikings fan go, no?
We just went through several years of Kirk, and like by the end of it, he ended up not being the worst cap hit in the entire league. So
yeah, so like above 40, I think is where Vikings fans might be like, okay, I don't know.
Well, speaking of cap hits and speaking of money, Dalvin Cook was playing out there on Sunday and seems healthy enough. Although I do question why, if he went out at all for any form of injury, he wanted to come back in. But there's a lot of talk about whether or not the Vikings should end up keeping Cook, whether or not they should try to get him to restructure, what's going to end up happening there. But it doesn't seem like, I say, for value that Cook, you're somebody who doesn't believe in paying running backs to begin with, but this seems like a poor fit at the moment.
Yeah, the issue with like this, so there's like a contingent of like anti-analytics Twitter that will take this like don't pay running backs discussion and talk about how it's like anti-player, which is like, I get it. you're talking about reducing someone's salary, like that sucks. Um, but also like that money does go elsewhere in this instance. It's about like the percentage of money and how you apportion it. And um, ideally, every player gets paid a ton of money, right? The salary cap should be abolished, all that, et cetera, et cetera. I literally just wrote an article about how the NFLPA is screwing their players, or rather, the NFL is screwing the NFLPA, which screws their players. But yeah, I think in terms of maximizing team wins, like if that's the goal, which it typically is, yeah, paying running backs is not ideal. The value that Alexander Madison provides per dollar is greater than the value that Dalvin Cook provides per dollar. Some people think that Alexander Madison is just a better back than Dalvin Cook. I think their primary concern is fumbles, which, okay, I get it. Fair enough. But there is a point where you want to ask, like, how much production is worth a fumble, right? Like Adrian Peterson was a pretty fumble-prone back. I think most people would take him as a runner, right? Like you might say, hey, if you could get Adrian Peterson at a reasonable deal, the fact that he's not a receiver means that you'd only be able to pay him for, but I don't know. People would still want Nick Chubb, right? So it's not that big a deal. But, you take Adrian Peterson's fumbles. They happened to have occurred in some pretty crucial moments in Vikings history, notably in some playoff games where they were eliminated in. I understand that. But for the most part, it is more worth it than not. I think the difference between Dalvin Cook and Alexander Madison, if you remove the money question from it, is worth the difference in their fumble rate. Like the difference in every non-fumble play that they generate is worth the difference in their fumble rate. I think that it's uncontroversial, or should be uncontroversial, to say that Alexander Madison is just, better. And the only reason I bring that, or is not better, sorry, the Dalvin Cook is just better. And the only reason I bring that up, I think most people would just be like, duh, right? Is just because I keep seeing it in my mentions from different people, not like the same person 8 times. But the question about their contracts makes that particularly interesting. The Vikings should probably attempt to restructure Dalvin Cook. I don't think that it would go very well. Zach Hiller is a very vociferous agent in defense of his client. And I think that the Vikings don't actually have a ton of leverage in this situation. I think it's really unlikely that they would cut him. So, yeah, they could ask for a restructure or an extension or whatever. But that's this is probably just not going to happen. But yeah, I mean, it's not an ideal situation. It's why I argued against the extension in the first place. You're almost, not exactly, but you're almost stuck here.
Madison did look good today. I say today on Sunday. Madison,
right.
2 touchdowns, looked good. Bounced off of defenders. Proved that he is an excellent number 2 back. Good for him.
Yeah, I mean, he looked better than Dalvin Cook did against the Bears. Like, fine, that's true. And it's funny because I remember in the preseason, the discussion was that they should cut Madison for, keeping 3 running backs. So you keep Ty Chandler and Kenny Wangu in some order and have Dalvin Cook, but you'd cut Alexander Madison or attempt to trade him, and the trade market wasn't going to be there for him. And now there are people, sometimes the same people. I don't know if it's usually the same people, but sometimes it is, I notice. But sometimes, there are people that are saying cut Dalvin Cook for Alexander Madison. Alexander Madison is almost as good, if not better, than Dalvin Cook. And it's like that was not the discussion at the beginning of the season. And I think that should tell you about the importance of like the samples that we get of Alexander Madison. People have been upset about some of the critical plays that he's missed out on. I think everyone kind of remembers that final 4th and 1 against Seattle that allowed Seattle the time to lead a comeback drive. That I think has been burned in people's brains. Alexander Madison was coming off of a relatively unimpressive season for him. Heading in, the Vikings drafted Ty Chandler. It seemed unlikely at the time that they would keep 4 running backs. So a bunch of people were like, well, Alexander Madison's not that good anyway. This year he had a really good season, right, as a backup running back. And so people have kind of changed their tune, and now they're talking about him like they did when he was a rookie, which, mind you, again, when he was a rookie, a lot of people did not love the pick. I think I was one of the kind of, I don't know, biggest detractors, but I was kind of leading the skepticism on that one. So I'll take that. That was more a question about investing a 3rd round pick. I think I'm still right about the 3rd round pick thing, but yeah. The question about Alexander Madison and Dalvin Cook is interesting, but kind of only academically. The Vikings are probably not going to do anything.
Irv Smith. He was back from IR.
Hey,
He was
what's
catching
up, Irv?
balls. Looked good.
yes, I mean, good. Yeah, it didn't look bad. I guess wasn't
It's-
asked to do much.
It's hard to look bad against this defense, I realize. However, he did catch a couple balls and make a couple of moves.
Yeah, well, the important part is the making a couple of moves, right? I guess he had a drop problem at the beginning of the year, probably related to that broken thumb. I'm just going to put that out there. But yeah, three targets, 3 receptions, 14 yards, made a couple of moves, had a long gain of 8. I believe that one was for a first down. That was nice. Having more options is better. The Vikings now, I think, have a little bit more flexibility when they go to tight end instead of having to rely on. I don't think do they even have. I got to take a look at who the Vikings have at tight end because there's like been a couple of injuries there, right? Yeah, it's Johnny Munt, right? They don't have Ben Ellefson. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, so yeah, they've got more options than with Johnny Munt in there. Munt is primarily considered by the Vikings to be a blocking guy. Irv Smith is considered by this Viking staff to primarily be a receiving guy. So it's not always, as versatile as you need it to be, but having 2 tight ends out there to be able to do kind of different things, run different plays is going to be effective and helpful for them, which is going to be an element that they'll have for the playoffs that they didn't have for most of the season. In theory, that should help them out a lot.
Nick Mullins was out there. That was
certainly something.
That
Yeah,
was
I mean, he
something.
played like a. He didn't do anything that would alarm me, right? Like when Kellen Mond was in for 3 plays against Green Bay, it was so catastrophically bad for 3 plays that I was just like, okay, we have an extremely small sample size, but the sample is extremely bad.
Yeah, it's
We
quite
also-
it's quite toxic. Meanwhile, Nick Mullins went 11 for 13.
Yeah, right. And like he threw a bad pick, right? Like I'm not going to ignore that. But like the thing with Kellen Mond is okay, he has a bad sample size. But within that sample was bad, and also our priors for him, what we knew about him heading in was also bad. The coaches didn't seem to like him. He did not perform very well in training camp of the preseason. If I say coaches didn't seem to like him, they outright said they did not like him. Like I shouldn't like be soft with the word usage here. They did not like him. And then we got to see a little bit and it was bad. Nick Mullins is the exact opposite. The priors are pretty good. He performed reasonably well, more than reasonably well. He almost performed like a starter in San Francisco. The Vikings went out of their way to get him. The Vikings have been, I'm not going to say excited to use him, but have been enthusiastic about having him on the roster. And then again, in a small sample, not as small as the Kellen Mond one, he looked all right. And the Vikings, what I found interesting was that the Vikings turned into more of a Shanahan team when he was, which makes sense, right? Like that's where he comes from. And it's not like the concepts are different. It's just they're more likely to go under center, right? Than the Kevin O'Connell Vikings with Kirk Cousins are. So you saw stuff that looked a little bit more like San Francisco, where they were going a little bit heavier. They were on their play actions. They were doing bootlegs. Again, like 14 dropbacks, 13 passes, so it's not, but like he played like you'd hope a good backup would play. And I think that that's nice. There's nothing huge here, nothing earth shattering, but it was, good to see that Nick Mullins is probably who we thought he was.
And Duke Shelley got his first career pick, and it looked good. And Patrick Peterson got what I can only... The Patrick Peterson pick was fun because it was clearly supposed to be like a comeback, like as far as the route for the wide receiver. And he just watched that ball soar 15 yards over his head right to Patrick Peterson.
Yeah, absolutely wild. Someone in the Discord at 9:05 a.m. In the game day thread said calling Duke Shelley gets his first interception today.
Yep.
So I'm gonna highlight this one real quick in the Discord.
We had, and had said it multiple times during the game thread, and then when it finally happened, everyone was so happy.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. 9:05 a.m. So good. All right. I'm sure a bunch of other people said it, but I'm highlighting this. That's the only thing I've said in the Discord in the past week. All right.
I thought it was less time than that because you didn't like the fan fiction that somebody had written about
Oh no,
you.
yeah, it was there 2 days ago or yesterday or something. That was rough. That's yeah. If you want to join the Discord, be very judicious about which channels you look in. The Case Cookus channel, totally fine. It's full of a bunch of posts where people say Case Cookus. It is a wholesome channel. Bee Breeds Not Races, that is the name of a channel. It is full of bee memes. So it's fine, but sometimes the bee memes get a little weird. The channel that's about online posting is toxic and you should mute it.
Which explains why that's the one that you spend the most time in.
It is the one I spend the most time in.
Yes.
Okay, so like, you know how doom scrolling is a thing where people will keep on scrolling through their Twitter timeline, or I guess if you're not on Twitter, Instagram, right, TikTok, just to like be sad, but you keep doing it because that's just what you're used to. I feel like me going into Online Brained, which is the name of the channel, is that it's the brain poison form of doom scrolling. It hurts me so much.
Well, it hurts us all, but we still go through it. But if we can bring this back to interceptions for just a moment,
Yeah.
How good could it possibly have felt for Duke Shelley to get that interception against the team that caught him? And there was something online. There was like a Twitter mention about an opposing player not being happy about the way that Shelley had celebrated, ball on the on the logo.
Oh yeah, on the Bears logo. Yeah.
And all I wanted to scream was like, it was disrespectful to that. I just want to scream, dude, the Bears have been disrespectful to that logo way more this year than anything Duke Shelley did. You guys have been absolutely an abomination. Justin Fields, you guys ran the most of any team this year. Ever. Great. You guys still sucked.
Yeah, and like the difference in performance with Justin Fields not there really tells you how catastrophically poorly constructed that team is. And the thing is, like, it's one thing if it's like Baker Mayfield doing that on the Ohio State. I think it was the Ohio State logo, right? Or Texas. I don't know. Baker Mayfield doing it with the flag. That's like one thing, right? And I don't hate that. But if I did hate that, that would not necessarily mean I would hate it when a player who was cut by a team does that to that team. There's something like personal there that really justifies it more than in any other way, right? Like if you're on the team, which is, I guess, the person who complained about it was literally a player for the Bears, right? If you're on the team, like I get like why like you feel the need to protect the logo and stuff like that. It's a kind of a symbol of who you are, and it's like, spitting in your face or something. But like, you spit in that guy's face first. Maybe not you personally, right? But what that logo represents did. So to me, it's just like fair play.
It was just a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
But Patrick Peterson, 5 interceptions for the year. Great.
Yeah, I think he's tied with Harrison Smith and Devin McCourty, right? For most interceptions among active players.
Yep. And and Shelley gets his first, and good on him for that. I mean, otherwise, there's not really much to discuss here. The Bears were terrible.
I will say the thing, and this was brought up on the Minnesota Football Party too, but this is worth bringing up. It's the Chris Reed being the center. That operation went pretty smoothly, right?
Yes. Yep.
And the primary issue with Chris Reed at center in the previous game was that the operation was bad, right? It's not necessarily that he was blocking poorly, although he did have some pretty bad moments in that regard, but it's that he caused 2 false starts for Ezra Cleveland, I think. And he caused 2 delays of game, right? And in this one, he potentially might have been responsible for a delay of game. I said on Twitter that I'm going to blame any snap penalty on him until I have like further notice. But honestly, genuinely speaking, watching the play, it seemed like a Cousins issue, if I'm being 100% honest. But that operation was running a lot smoother. And the hope is that it will continue to run smoother because he's a better blocker than Garrett Bradbury. And so if he can snap the ball and if he can learn how to make that operation run as smoothly as possible, then he's a better option back there. Center is a very incredibly demanding job. It's a very technical job, but it's also one that happens to be, from a blocking perspective, a little bit less important. So you get paid less to be a center. And you get drafted later in the draft, and you get help as a blocker, right? And so it tends to be fairly underappreciated. It's not unless you get like, somebody like a Jason Kelsey or a Creed Humphrey that people like really appreciate the center, right? It's a pretty demanding skill set because snapping the ball and getting your hands up to block is extremely difficult. You need an extremely quick snapping hand. You need to tuck your elbow in, which is very difficult to do if you're also moving your arms really quickly in order to get the snap off and to get that accurately. So if he can snap the ball, that's great. If he can do it within the confines of what the offense asks him to do, even better, because he is a better blocker at center than Garrett Bradbury. So hopefully they're gonna switch between him and Greg Mance this practice week. But what we saw in the Bears game, I thought was encouraging.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, the Bears were terrible, but the main thing that the Vikings were like doing in this particular instance was trying to make sure that their woes at center are at least handled appropriately, not making things overly complicated, being able to implement a system that he knows, as opposed to stumbling into a game where he'd never played center before, like in a professional game before. So otherwise there's not really much to discuss. Kirk Cousins was in there for a half. He looked fine against a terrible defense that contained way too many former Vikings that were not good when they left.
Yeah, I thought more of Armon Watts. He did get a good moment in the game, but yeah, it's
yeah. There's your interview with Lauren Cox said it all. Like, there's a lot of former Vikings on this team.
There's a lot,
and these were not like ones that we were gonna miss.
Yeah, I mean, Harrison Hand got his revenge in there a little bit, so that's something. But like Jalen Holmes, yeah, okay. I'm glad he has continued to find employment, but he's not a particularly great football player.
Is there anything else that we want to talk about here? I mean, this Justin Jefferson got a couple of catches, nothing really. TJ Hawkinson had a good move for his one catch, ended up bouncing off a defender, ended up getting a first down. Good on him.
That was pretty slick. I like that.
KJ Osborne was all over the place, catching everything since they decided to triple team Justin Jefferson for most of the time that he was out there.
Yeah, 117 yards and only 5 catches.
Yeah, he was all over the place. The Bears decided they were not going to be beaten by Justin Jefferson. So they were beaten by the number 3 receiver.
Yeah. Honestly, at this point, I guess he's the number 2 now, huh?
Well, yes. I think it's... But touchdown regression candidate Adam Thielen did get a touchdown, right. So...
Yeah, well, he's a touchdown regression victim now, right? Because his touchdowns are actually down.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Important designation. Well, that's going to be it for this. We're going to talk about the Giants game next episode. We'll preview that. We'll do all the fun playoff stuff. And but right now, it's time for the red meat for the Vikings fans. If everyone can please just take a moment and enjoy this life without the Packers in the playoffs.
It's so beautiful, man.
It's wonderful.
So, okay, like the game, like if I was not, let's say I'm not invested in the Packers losing. Let's put that out there as an objective journalist who is not annoyed by Aaron Rodgers or has contentious interactions with Packers bloggers or podcasters online. I'm an objective national reporter. I don't have a stake emotionally in whether or not the Packers make the playoffs. Sure. The Lions ruled. Like, the fact that the Lions... I'm so, like, hesitant to always use kind of, like, sports movie language. Like, when talking about football, because it's rarely like that, right? It's a very kind of... hard and fast, like, wins matter. It's a business, so the business side of it matters a lot. Keeping track of incentives. Player coach relationships are always more complex than they always seem. Players always have their own individual motivations of going into a game that are not entirely team focused, and you need to wrangle all of that. There need to be steps taken to preserve the long-term health of the players. That's not very movie material, right? Unless it's a movie that's critical of the NFL, which fair enough. It's very we need to take a look at the long-term consequences from a winning perspective, having a rational discussion about tanking, all of that, right? Like that is, I'm so ensconced in this, and my interactions with coaches and team executives and even players are kind of infiltrated with this like very professional business-like understanding of the NFL. And it kind of saps your joy of the game a lot, right? It's, which is not to say, right, like that it's not fun to watch fun plays, but like a game overall has a very different kind of emotional impact for me than I think it does for a lot of people watching football, which is great, right? It allows me to write as well as I need to write, but it also allows people to like enjoy the game in a way that's very kind of uninterrupted, which is awesome. The way the Lions approached and handled and played this game kind of brought that back for me in a way that I did not anticipate or, expect in any way, right? Because it's very, I said this on Twitter, I have like a very clinical, maybe cynical view of taking a look at football. And the Lions, I hate saying stuff like this, but like they played their hearts out. They wanted it more. They had nothing to play for and they played for it, right? Like that. How could you not be like,
all they had was spite. All they had was spite.
All they had was spite. Okay. So I told this story to my work Slack, and it was entirely too long. And they had an emote react to it, so I know they didn't read it. Which fair play. It was several paragraphs. It's a story from my debate career. I'm sorry in advance, but I don't know if I probably have told this story before. But it reminded me of this. So in college debate, I did a policy debate, which is a partner debate. So I have a debate partner debating against two other people, right? And the rule is that so each tournament, you've got a number of preliminary rounds and elimination rounds. And you need to qualify for the elimination rounds by having a good enough record. Many tournaments, especially at the college level, are set up so that any winning record will clear to the elimination rounds. But you need to have a winning record. Some tournaments are set up so it's the top percent, in which case an even record sometimes will be fine, whatever, right? You need to qualify, and you need to have a good enough record to qualify for the elimination rounds. So in two-person debate, with each person speaking twice in each round, if you're alone, right, you're debating Maverick, you'd give 4 speeches instead of 2. And you cannot qualify for elimination rounds if you're debating solo, which again is called debating Maverick. So if you're just one person and you don't have a debate partner in that round, you can win the round, right? But your record will not qualify you for elimination rounds. And the reasoning is, this is as much about logical reasoning and winning the points and presenting good evidence as it is about teamwork, collaboration, combining diverse skill sets, and also overcoming a bad partner is just kind of a handicap that you'll have to go through, right? Like that's just part of it. And also, debate would end up becoming way too exhausting because people would then just become individual debaters, and it'd be very difficult emotionally and mentally speaking to be an individual debater, and that would be the way it trends. So they put a stop to it. You cannot qualify for elimination rounds. So my debate partner had to leave mid-tournament once. It was CETA Nationals. It's one of the 2 end-of-year tournaments that are considered the national tournaments. The winners of that tournament are dubbed the national champion. So it's that and the NDT, the National Debate Tournament. So there are 2 champions every year. Sometimes the same team wins both of those tournaments. So there's 1 champion, right? But it's 2 national tournaments. CETA is one of them. It's obviously a really big deal. My debate partner had to leave midway through the tournament because of his grandmother's funeral, which left me to debate Maverick on the second day. So we debated together on the first day, went 2-2. So I needed to go 3-1 on the second day in order to make it, but I couldn't make it because I was alone. So I debated the next day and went 2-1 in the first 3 rounds. So I ended up with a 4-3 record. And if I wanted to pretend to qualify, I needed to win the next round. It wouldn't have mattered, obviously. I was against a team that had just started their debate program that year. This is the first year in that debate program's history. They were about to qualify for their first elimination round in their school's history. Only if they beat me. They had to beat me to do it. And the fact that their first elimination round would be in the national tournament would have been really special. Before the round, they figured out that I was debating alone. Before the round, they knew that I couldn't qualify, right? And so they said, hey, this round doesn't mean anything for you, but it means the world to us, right? Would you consider conceding so that, we could make it to the elimination rounds in our program's history for the first time? And I told them to F off. Absolutely not, dude. Absolutely not. And I beat the crap out of them. I won with no reservations, right? Like it's you have some pride. Win your rounds, man.
So you come here for the Vikings. You come here for the Vikings breakdowns. You leave for stories of when a Reef made college kids cry.
Okay, no, they didn't cry, but I have done that.
Of course.
Look, football players cry when they lose too. It's normal. I feel bad. No, I don't. But I did that kind of like drive to compete when there's nothing on the line, but your desire to compete is actually legitimately inspiring. I love it. It made me emotional watching, of all teams, the Detroit Lions. I am a Man Campbell fan for life, unless he does something, right? Unless he gets milkshake ducked. But like, this dude absolutely rules. He got his team to like buy in to, and I think most of the players didn't know and they refused to know, right? Like, but obviously there was like the interviews beforehand with all the sideline reporter told us like, hey, when I was walking around warm-ups, all the players told me that they didn't even want to know, which fine, right? But like, I think they legitimately didn't know. And I think that they were happy about it. And Dan Campbell said, look, we're playing so that they don't make it. And I love that. It's like spiteful, but not in a way that is like toxic and poisonous. It's like, it's honestly, it's respectful to the rest of the league, right? That they didn't give up because everyone else had to earn it and the Packers have to as well. And if the Packers can't earn it, then that's just too bad. That's just too bad. I loved it.
It put them in an interesting situation too, because, and they say more respectful even than the Texans not tanking and winning the game, going for the win with Lovie Smith. Like, even more impressive than that. But it put the Packers and the Lions in an interesting spot, because with the Lions, you knew there was, well, maybe like Dan Campbell knew, there was no tomorrow. So we have all these trick plays just sitting on the shelf.
Yeah.
It's time. It's time to break out a bubble screen hook and ladder. And what a time to do it.
Yeah. That like the rules so hard. Like that they just like emptied the magazine, right? Like, cause like, Andy Reid probably would have saved some for next year, but that is just like not how, in fact, I know based off, cause I wrote a bunch of coaching profiles. I know Andy Reid would have saved some next year based off of like the things that Mike Kafka, the former quarterbacks coach for the Kansas City Chiefs, said, right? I know that he would save them for next year. But that's just not how he's just going to find new ones next year, because like he just has the kind of faith in himself and his coaching staff to be able to do that. Now, I don't know he's going to have the same coaching staff. Both offensive coordinator Ben Johnson and defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn have received multiple requests to be interviewed. I believe Ben Johnson 3, Aaron Glenn 1, but Aaron Glenn has also been interviewed by 3 or 4 teams in previous coaching cycles. So they might not have either of them next year, which is gonna suck for them. But it's just so cool. It's just like, look, we're here to win a football game. We're here to play a football game. We've got a bunch of plays. Why not use them? And why not use them against the Packers? Like, I don't know. It was like the most kind of pure. It's what people think college football should be, right? Like they just played because they wanted to, right? And That doesn't mean that they don't deserve to get paid. They absolutely do, right? That doesn't mean that, that there aren't all of these other things that we need to like pay attention to in terms of, league implications and player safety. And I can't believe the NFL has scheduled a game that could have been and turned out to be meaningless as the final game of the regular season. That is scheduling malpractice. There are games on the schedule that I think were noon games, maybe afternoon games that would have been in play no matter what, would have mattered to either team no matter what. And they didn't schedule those at the end. Don't really understand what that's about. Maybe it's because of network bidding contracts and ESPN bid for, or maybe not ESPN, NBC, I don't know. Someone bid for that final game and it kind of didn't matter, right? But it sucks. I think that is malpractice. The league should be able to have a little bit of veto power when it comes to that sort of thing. But all of those discussions aside, all of this question about kind of what the realities of football are, how do they just play because they wanted to play? You don't see that very often. That was pretty cool. And also, the Packers lost. That was pretty cool too.
Yeah, the end of that game really had everything. It had trick plays. It had Quay Walker being an absolute idiot.
Oh my God, I can't believe that. Well, there was like 3, because Quay Walker, which is the worst one.
Yep.
The cornerback was Rasul Douglas, and there was like a third one that was just like really stupid. The Packers were completely undisciplined. I hate using these words that always are couched in like.
But it made sense.
That's what it was.
It absolutely made sense. And then there were plays that didn't make any sense at all from the Packers. Like, I'm still confused as to what that player was doing for the kick when he walked up and put his hand down. Was he just trying to prevent a practice kick?
That's what it seemed like, and I believe he said that in the locker room afterwards. Yeah, so
it looked like he was taking direction from the sideline, but no one on the broadcast had any idea what he was doing, because I don't remember the last time I've seen anything like that.
Yeah, that was so like, who does that kind of like, and he did it so confidently, right? Like everyone must have just been like, what is happening here? And then no one stopped it, right? Because everyone is, that's like part of coaching, right? It's just like all these players are just kind of coached to do what they do. And here's Rasul Douglas being like, well, they called a timeout. I don't know what you could do about that. So I'm just going to stop the snap from happening. And he was not penalized for that because it was a dead ball moment. So walking into the neutral zone, not a big deal because the play was dead. There was no play. He was penalized for how he responded to how people responded to him doing that, which is also very funny.
It felt a bit like the drunk who wanders over as you're playing beer pong, and like he smacked the ball out of the air. And everyone just went, dude, what the hell?
Yeah. And for a second, you're like, can he do that? No, of course he can't.
Except that made more sense than what he did.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, I was trying to Google who the third player was. I can't seem to find it. But yeah, the Quay Walker thing. Holy crap. And okay, so Quay Walker shoves a trainer. And sometimes when a player interacts with a trainer or an official, it's accidental, right? That happened with Justin Jefferson. I'm still surprised he didn't get penalized. If I'm being honest, he probably should have been. I don't understand why he wasn't. But I very strongly believe that he had no idea, right? That the official was there when he did that. With Quay Walker, so this is the second time Walker has been ejected, right? So what happened was I'm trying to remember who was injured on the ground, because right, it was DeAndre Swift, right?
It was Swift,
yeah. And Swift has had a history of injuries, and this one in particular was a blow to the head. It was
not just the blow to the head, but it was because his ankle was kind of rolled up on. So he had that and the blow to the head and the blow to the head never got penalized.
I do have thoughts about that too. But yeah, so it was like a forearm shiver to the face mask, and his leg buckled underneath him because of the tackle, right? And so he's on the ground, right? And Quay Walker leans in to check on DeAndre Swift. They're teammates in college, right? And Lions team trainer muscled his way, as they're supposed to do, muscled his way in, right? Worked his way in there. And Walker looked at him, had time to register what was going on. I don't know if he did register it, right? But I can say he had time to register it, and then shoves him in the back and into another Lions trainer who is at the moment treating or attending to DeAndre Swift, right? And, this is his second ejection of the season, right? Because against the Bills, just like the Week 8 game that the Packers had, he's on the Bills sideline after a tackle. He gets up and he shoves a practice squad player on the sideline. And he said, hey, I'm emotional. Sometimes I can do that. So I have two thoughts here that I think aren't the consensus opinions here. The first, I think, is that the forearm shiver on DeAndre Swift, I don't think that was intentional. I think this is an issue where I've talked about this a couple of times, where slow motion tricks us. So slow motion has a tendency to make things look intentional, even if you are attempting to correct for how fast things would be in regular motion. Like there's been multiple studies done where people have looked at stuff in slow motion to determine intentionality, have been told, hey, be sure to correct for the fact that this is in slow motion, and have still assigned greater intentionality to actions than people watching stuff at regular speed. When I watched the forearm shiver in regular speed, it looks like he is attempting to get this guy in the chest plate with a forearm, which is bad tackling for him. But it does not look like to me that he is attempting to hit DeAndre Swift in the helmet with his forearm. If he was flagged, I would not have been bothered by that fact. I think that's just like what happens when you play like that. But the fact that he wasn't flagged also does not bother me that much. It may have led to a significant injury for DeAndre Swift, which sucks. But in terms of attempting to figure out what the player is doing, attempting to punish behavior that is malintentioned, this would not accomplish that, in my opinion. I don't know. The second thing is Quay Walker is seen, I think, right as no, it was actually during play. They switched to a camera of in the sideline or in the tunnel as he's heading to the locker room of him just being very emotional. I think he threw his helmet. He's very emotive, right? And he's crying and stuff like that, right? And a lot of people are making fun of him for that. And I get it, right? Because he did something almost unconscionable a week after athletic trainers just saved a player's life. Like, we're in a moment where athletic trainers have, I would argue, more reverence than they typically have, and they typically have quite a bit of reverence, right? And so for people to make fun of a guy who just shoved an athletic trainer in the course of his, not just like on the sideline, but in the course of his duties to help the player, fine, right? That's fine. But people saying that his being upset is somehow directed at someone, I don't think that there's any fairness to that. I think that to me, I read it like he was extremely upset with himself. That's how I read it. I read it that he was extremely upset with himself. And a lot of people read it as he was upset at the refs for having ejected him or something. And there's no way to tell what it was. Walker has not earned the benefit of the doubt, I guess. So, fair enough. But for me, it just looked like that was the way I read it. And yeah.
I have a feeling if he had a real problem with the ejection itself, he would have been complaining on the field about it.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, he trotted off immediately.
Exactly. Yeah. Immediately. Yeah. So yeah. He as soon as he could, he talked to the athletic trainer and apologized to him. Obviously, after the game the next morning. But apparently he had a long conversation with the guy. So, I don't know if that means anything to anybody. Obviously, the team would want him to do that. So who can tell how kind of intentional that is. But, for the most part, he's kind of doing the right thing there. But yeah, he apologized to the team and so on. Devontae Wyatt also seemed to run into the trainer too. He was also a teammate with DeAndre Swift and Quay Walker at Georgia. So that's something to kind of consider. But LaFleur is right. He excoriated both Walker and Wyatt, and was yelling at them on the sideline. So that's like good, right? Like that happened at least.
This was the end of this game had just about everything, including a decision to go for it on 4th down that I don't know many people like, and that's kind of been the thing for the Lions this year, is that very rarely has this decision on 4th down worked out for them. It didn't work out for them against the Vikings in the first game, famously. But
right, yeah.
This was a decision that was made and absolutely worked.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because Dan Campbell seems to come to a lot of these decisions, not just 4th down decisions, but like clock management decisions, and other decisions that are somewhat against the grain that happen to align with what analytics nerds want teams to do. And that is not the reason he is making those decisions. He is making those decisions because Sean Payton told him to go with his gut, and that's what he's doing. He's like, look, if we lose, they're on the 1 yard line here. If we win, it's a touchdown. What's the downside? Let's go and get this touchdown.
And they made Green Bay use one of their own timeouts in what could only be described as like gutsy as hell. Like, how do you decline a penalty that's going to get you a first? No, we're gonna run it again, and we're gonna cause them to put in a timeout.
Yeah,
unheard of.
Yeah, beneath all of like this like himbo exterior, Dan Campbell is like wicked smart. There's like been a ton of discussion. I know there was a discussion about this in our Discord. So like accepting the penalty automatically results in a first down, but I believe it stops the clock, right? If he accepts the penalty.
It does.
So that's the thing, right? So he declines the penalty because the clock is more important than the down, and they only need 1 yard to get a first down. And so they think that there's a good chance that they'll get that first down. They were right. As well as drain 40 odd seconds off the clock, right? And so the penalty would mean that they would need 10 yards to get a first down as opposed to 1 yard. And the number of plays that they need is not very many. And so having to get 10 yards to get a first down so you have another set of plays is too many. You just need, a couple of plays. So they wanted the clock to keep running, which forced the Packers to use a timeout, which means they had one fewer timeout on the next down series, which they then converted. Also, just by the way, 2nd and 1 is better than 1st and 10 in a standard situation. I'm not saying coaches should decline in that situation, but something to consider. It's not true for the Vikings because they run too often on 2nd and 1, even in the Kevin O'Connell era, but teams get into better field position following 2nd and 1 than they do on 1st and 10, even after you account for the fact that a new series of down helps you. This is all, expected points takes all of that into account. So, so 2nd and 1 is better, but that 2nd and 1 is absolutely better. If they don't pick up the play on 2nd down or 3rd down or 4th down, that might have backfired because it would have given the Packers a little bit of time. But like 3 downs to get 1 yard, I think Dan Campbell can do that.
Between that and Aaron Rodgers' arm punts out there.
Man. Kirby Joseph, he can't help but get his hands on Aaron Rodgers' passes, huh?
Beautiful.
A rookie. Yeah, so he has, I think, 5 interceptable passes of Aaron Rodgers. Now, he's only reeled in 3 of them, but that's more than most.
I loved the thing earlier about I'm going to have him sign it, and if it's not his final ball that I'm going to catch, great, I'm going to get more. It's like, you have that confidence about go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely go for it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Unreal. So, I don't know, there's not much more to say about this glorious game other than now we get to sit and listen to the national media talk about whether or not Aaron Rodgers is coming back, doing the whole will he, won't he retirement thing, which we're all sick of. And to those on the outside who don't understand why everyone in the NFC North is so tired of Aaron Rodgers, it's because of things like the Lions just pulled this off, and everyone is talking about, the commentators rather, are just talking about Aaron Rodgers immediately afterwards. Is this the last time? Blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, the Lions did something unthinkable. This is why everyone in the NFC North is so tired of Aaron Rodgers. It's terrible. But the Lions were able to win. They they end the season for the Packers. So now in the NFC North, you have the Vikings on top, the Lions in second, the Packers in third, and of all people to have the number one pick, the Bears. What a mess of a division. Yeah. And it happened to work out for the Vikings this year. Like, what can you even say at this point? Like, yeah, Minnesota. We somehow did it. Great. What a dumb year. This is going to be one for the record books. And we get to keep going. The Vikings play against the Giants and we get to keep going. I don't know. This was fun and ridiculous. And immediately afterwards, like during the game, my younger brother was like, so if the Packers lose, we go to Wild Wings right now. Like, right? Like they close at 1. It's like, I don't want to go to Wild Wings. And then it like slowly but surely, Goff got more comfortable. Rodgers couldn't do anything in the red zone. They had 4 trips and they came away with 9 points?
Yeah, it was. I mean, so the Packers have been bad at the red zone all year. I've mentioned multiple times that being bad or good in the red zone is not sustainable, but it was nice to see that particular stat maintain itself. They have been extremely bad, specifically on the goal line for whatever reason. The fact that they have A.J. Dillon and a pretty good run blocking unit, like not the world, it's not the Lions, right? But a pretty good run blocking unit, and can't get the ball. Like you've got, you know, Quadzilla 2 with AJ Dillon. You can't get the ball in from the 1 yard line.
You cannot.
You've got a Hall of Fame quarterback. You can't get with a 6'4" receiver and a 6'5" tight end. Can't get the ball up the goal line.
No,
rough.
And then you
just run an end around. That's what the Vikings do. The Vikings always like run these passes out to the sideline, and they look easy, and they're not. Like it takes a fair amount of arm strength to get the timing right for a quarterback. But that's like the thing Aaron Rodgers has, right? Like that's the thing people know him for. Dude, run some passes out to the flats. Get your running backs out there, man. Like they're supposed to catch passes, right? That's the whole thing with Aaron. Aaron Jones scored like 18 touchdowns 2 years ago, right? That's part of it. Come on.
As the person whose identity is basically missed kicks, let me tell you how much I enjoyed that Crosby crossbar one. He couldn't have hit the crossbar harder if he tried.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, Justice was complaining about how his leg had vanished, right? In our previous episode. And that's part of the reason that the Packers have the highest return percentage and lowest touchback percentage on kickoffs. And, you know, they snuck one in against the Vikings. They were not able to do that against the Lions. And, of course, you know, the Vikings have allowed the highest field goal percentage. Not a repeatable skill, but a fact. So, yeah, that was an unsustainable kick, right? That Mason Crosby made against the Vikings. And there you go.
I enjoyed Justice's tweet during the game about how everyone looked at the sidelines and asked, so are we punting it here or what are we doing?
Yeah, right. Yeah. You know, what was it? You know, it's a good sign when the coach asks, are we punting here?
Nope. They had Mason Crosby give it a shot. What a glorious game. All right, let's get into the mailbag. We've got plenty of mailbag stuff to go over. First question is from Mayman10, who asks, so is Duke Shelley sustainable?
Probably not. Uh, but I would love to find out. That's the thing, right? Like the only reason that answer matters. I mean, obviously it matters for trying to figure out if he's like going to be reliable in the playoffs, but you don't really have a choice. So you're going to play him either way, right? The only reason that answer matters is trying to figure out what to do with the cornerback position next year, right? How much should you invest in the cornerback position? Now, it should be a fair amount, right? Because you have a cap space issue, kind of. You don't have Patrick Peterson under contract. You don't. All you have under contract are Andrew Booth, Cameron Dantzler, and Caleb Evans, if I'm remembering correctly. Luke Braun has been kind of hammering this on Twitter a little bit, but it's true regardless of whether or not Patrick Peterson's under contract, right? You have to get some cornerbacks, period, right? So the question is, how much should you invest in a cornerback? The answer is always going to be a lot, but can Duke Shelley be part of a potential solution at cornerback? And I think that the answer is yes. You need to get him some competition. You need to bring in possibly a first-round corner, right? I mean, it really depends on how you evaluate the Vikings' need profile, right? So, like, hey, a guard would be pretty nice, or a center. I don't know. Maybe Chris Reed's the guy. I don't know. But cornerback is, like, up there on the list, right? Like, wide receiver's on the list. Cornerback is, like, up there on the list. And so you probably want a first-round corner, probably to replace Patrick Peterson. And then you probably want Duke Shelley competing with Cam Dantzler and Andrew Booth for that second spot, or just have like a 4-person competition for the 2 spots. But I think Duke Shelley is part of that conversation, and obviously the Vikings will, I shouldn't say obviously, it's never obvious, but I'm guessing the Vikings will extend it, right? So that's, yeah, I don't think that he's sustainable, but I like our priors tell us that he's probably not a great cornerback, but he's in a position to prove me wrong about that, and that's really cool.
Mayman also asks, Cousins has gotten hit a lot this season. Has gotten hit the most this season, actually. Has he managed to acclimate to throwing under that kind of pressure? Is his difference in stats between hit and no hit smaller than other QBs who might not get hit as much?
In terms of finding statistics while you're hit, that's actually really difficult to find. I haven't been able to find it. I know that Pro Football Focus has it, somewhere kind of in their database about kind of how a player throws when they're hit as they're thrown. Now, Cousins, of course, has taken a number of hits. He leads the league in total number of hits, as well as total number of hits plus sacks, which some people call knockdowns, which I believe the official statistic for hits requires they be knocked down. So sure, fine. Now, not all sacks are hits. A strip sack, for example, is not necessarily a quarterback hit. And I know that like SIS, makes these distinctions, but it makes statistic gathering like fairly difficult. So we're just going to use sacks plus hits for that. In terms of total number of pressures, Kirk Cousins does lead the league in most number of dropbacks under pressure, but in percentages, he's not. He actually is not even in the top 10 in terms of percentages. He's tied for 11th with Russell Wilson. So, at the top are like, Justin Fields, Daniel Jones, Taylor Heineke, depending on your cutoff, that includes Skylar Thompson, players that invite pressure in a fairly big way, right? Like these are players that scramble a lot, and scrambles are highly correlated with pressures and sacks. So this isn't a huge, surprise or anything like that. But in terms of play under pressure, you're kind of in an interesting situation with Cousins. So he is actually, in terms of yards per attempt, has the second best differential of play under pressure versus play in a clean pocket. So most quarterbacks, in fact, almost every quarterback except for 2, Cousins is one of them, every quarterback except for 2 has a higher yards per attempt inside a clean pocket than inside a pressured pocket. So the biggest differences are probably not huge surprises, right? Zach Wilson has done dramatically better in a clean pocket than a pressured pocket, although actually not all that great in a clean pocket compared to other guys, just the difference is pretty huge. Jimmy Garoppolo is up there. Mac Jones, Tom Brady, Jared Goff are all up there. And, quarterbacks generally do a better job of managing and avoiding pressure than they do a job of playing well under pressure. Now, Cousins actually has better yards per attempt when under pressure than in a clean pocket. So does Josh Allen, the only two quarterbacks in the NFL with that. If you expand that to include touchdowns and interceptions, so for an adjusted yards per attempt, Kirk Cousins also second in the NFL behind Josh Allen in terms of having a much, much better adjusted yards per attempt under pressure than in a clean pocket. Now, there are some other quarterbacks that have a better, that are negative, right? Basically, when you subtract clean pocket from pressure, adjusted yards per attempt. They include Daniel Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, and a bunch of guys not playing well. Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr, Andy Dalton, Joe Flacco, Carson Wentz. This is not a good thing. Like, it's always good in the moment, right? Like, it's good that Cousins has played well under pressure. It is concerning that Cousins is not good in a clean pocket. So the fact that so if you take a look at, like, let's say his PFF grade, for example, in a clean pocket, is actually one of the lower ones in the NFL. It's like 19th out of 32, right? That's not great. Now, if you expand the cutoff to like 40, it's still around 19th. So great. That's about average. But if you take a look at, like, let's say his like yards per attempt in a clean pocket, it's pretty bad. It's 34th out of 40, right? 6.8 yards per attempt in a clean pocket. That's not great. When you take a look at it in a pressured pocket, it is one of the best in the league, 7.6, right? Yards per attempt. His PFF grade is 6th in a clean pocket, or in a pressured pocket. And the reason that this is a concern is it tells us that the Vikings' best plays are somewhat reliant on explosiveness that occurs under pressure. And there's two problems. One, pressure play is not stable. Clean pocket play is. Two, explosive plays aren't stable. Efficiency is. The Vikings' first down rate in a pressured pocket is not that great because their completion percentage is not that great. This comes from giant explosive plays. The most memorable ones are the ones where he's getting hit as he's throwing. Now, some of this might be due to stuff that is repeatable, right? Like if they are blitzing, right, and he's under pressure because it's a blitz, that's why. Obviously, Cousins is holding on to the ball a little bit longer so that he can wait for a receiver to get open and throw the ball, right? There's some intentionality to it, and that intentionality might tell us this is something that, maybe there's something to it that we can kind of avoid some of the sustainability questions around it because there's a process here that we're designed to get. But there are a lot of quarterbacks that do that don't sustain high levels of play under pressure going forward. Now, the counter to this would be that Cousins has a pretty high grade in a clean pocket in previous seasons, and this should translate over. My concern is that he needs to hold in the constraints of this particular offense. He needs to hold on to the ball a little bit longer, and it's not always going to turn into a giant play to a wide open KJ Osborne in the fourth quarter. I think that this is a pretty big concern. I wouldn't say that he's managed to acclimate to throwing under that kind of pressure. To get back to the specifics of this question, I would say that this is in part, Cousins is super gritty and tough, and that's true, right? That's just true. But also that the Vikings are riding the line, and this is probably another pretty decent example about how some of their best moments are not moments that translate well going forward into figuring out how good of a team they are. So this has devolved back into sustainability talk. Sorry about that, but this does bring up another interesting question, which is how are the Vikings playing so well when they're under pressure so often and Cousins is not doing great on standard dropbacks from down to down? And it's because of really great play under pressure, which is laudable, but it is not likely repeatable. Every pressured pocket looks a little bit different. Every clean pocket looks the same. So it's just the play under pressure is just not going to translate because the sample is just muddier for pressured pockets. Things look different. Sometimes there's blitzes, sometimes they're not. Sometimes the pressure comes up the middle. Sometimes it's fast pressure, sometimes it's slow pressure, right? Clean pockets are just clean pockets. There's a survivability bias here, but I'm worried about that being kind of a thing that he can take with him all the way through the playoffs. Now, smaller quarterbacks, some smaller quarterbacks can take a lot of hits. Russell Wilson is one of them, right? Some taller quarterbacks can't take any hits, right? That's actually pretty well known. Kirk Cousins, for whatever reason, is a bit of an Iron Man in that regard. So I don't think that he's necessarily acclimating to throwing under that kind of pressure, but I do think that we can kind of shelve the discussion about whether or not Kirk Cousins fails under pressure, right? That is the part of the discussion I think that we can just say, hey, maybe this isn't an interesting or good talking point anymore. Let's put that one away. Cousins has done pretty well under pressure, not just this year, but over the past 2 years, but especially this year. And so maybe that's no longer a good talking point when talking about who Cousins is as a quarterback. But that's sustaining itself going forward now.
Let's go to Sean Bolsharif, who asks, should we be worried with the run game heading into the playoffs, and who is to blame? Is it the O-line, running backs, or coaching?
Yeah, you should be worried about the run game a little bit. I'm not like overly concerned just because of it. The importance of the run game in general is not that extreme, both in terms of the way the Vikings run their offense just generally, and also second, the way it matters or impacts football games, right? Which is not to say I completely buy into everything that the nerds say about the running game. I think that there are some knock-on effects that are worth kind of exploring a little bit more that are not really neatly captured in the statistics. Christian McCaffrey's performance in San Francisco is certainly intriguing in regards to that question. But the concern is there. Certainly, it's much better to have a good running game, and certainly I would rather not play an opponent that has a good running game. But it's just on the list of concerns I have about the Vikings, it's a little bit lower on that list. Is it on the O-line? Yes, it is a little bit. I think Ed Ingram has been very up and down as a run blocker. Cleveland has been less so, but he still had a little bit of volatility there. And of course, the Vikings are playing a third-string center at center. And how Oli Udoh is going to play into the playoffs as a run blocker, I don't know. Certainly he has the size, but whether or not he's got the footwork to be a good run blocker, that's kind of a different concern. Coaching, always difficult to tell. I would be surprised if it was coaching, but neither would I be shocked. I would just be like, oh, I wouldn't have expected that. Supposed to be a pretty good coaching staff, especially on the O-line. The O-line kind of determines the direction of the running game more than the running backs do. I did expect a lot more out of Dalvin Cook this year. I did mention in training camp that he looked faster than he's looked in a long time. Certainly at the beginning of the year, he was playing very healthy, and we were not getting a ton of yardage out of him on individual runs. Maybe this is another example of variance. I think that the Vikings maybe have had difficulty acclimating their running scheme to the small differences in the way that the Vikings run the wide zone now.
Next question is going to be from Euleron, who asks, do legitimate hopes of a Super Bowl appearance hinge on the health of Blake Brandel?
He's been a good backup. I don't know if I'd say they hinge on him, but certainly I think there'd be a pretty dramatic upgrade from Oli Udoh with him. It kind of really depends on all of the factors that are involved in health, but also whether or not the Vikings kind of want to move things around. I think that they would, right? I don't think that they're overly optimistic about Udoh, but sometimes you get into a groove and you don't really want to shift things around. I would say, given that the next matchup is up against Kayvon Thibodeau, I would way prefer to have Blake Brandel in there. And I think that it would not shock me if, of the many small differences that determine a win or loss, Kayvon Thibodeau versus Oli Udoh versus having Blake Brandel in there against Kayvon Thibodeau is going to be fairly significant.
Next question is going to be from Luke Braun, who asks, of everyone who got fired today, who would you most like to see on the Viking staff?
So I'm going to plug Pro Football Network here. We've got an NFL Black Monday tracker. And not a ton of people were fired on Black Monday, which is kind of surprising. So they include Arizona Cardinals head coach Cliff Kingsbury. They include Browns defensive coordinator Joe Woods. They include Houston Texans head coach Lovie Smith. Tennessee Titans offensive coordinator Todd Downing, as well as assistants Keith Carter and another one. There's a head coach opening in Indianapolis, a head coach opening in Carolina, and a head coach opening in Denver, but they were not fired today. Of the ones that were fired, I would say I would take Frank Reich to be an offensive coordinator or a quarterbacks coach. I don't know that would be I don't know that you could get him to be a quarterbacks coach anywhere, but that's not the nature of the question. The question is, who'd you like to see on the Vikings staff, not whether or not it was feasible. And I think Frank Reich as a quarterbacks coach would be fantastic. Don't want to diminish the work of the Vikings quarterbacks coaching right now, but it seems like something is amiss. It's not quite working. So would be nice to get Frank Reich in there to kind of clear things up. As a quarterbacks coach, he seems to be fine. As a head coach, maybe not. I would not want Todd Downing for two reasons. One, he was not a great offensive coordinator. Apparently, he's a decent quarterbacks coach. Todd Downing, Eden Prairie native. Two, he's about to be suspended by the league for his Dewey. So pass, I guess. Joe Woods, as a defensive backs coach, is somewhat intriguing. The Vikings defensive backs are not great, but I don't know that Joe Woods would be a particularly amazing fit. Part of the reason I would be worried is because he does not seem to get along with the players over in Cleveland, and I don't want that kind of discord. Cliff Kingsbury, I don't think would be a great quarterbacks coach or offensive coordinator, but it would certainly be intriguing. Just think it wouldn't necessarily fit with the staff. Lovie Smith as a defensive coordinator would be interesting for sure. I think that, again, not something that you'd be able to do. I mean, he's been a head coach in 3 consecutive stops. I feel like for him, it's head coach or nothing. He can always go back to college, right? So he was 4 consecutive stops, right? So it's Chicago Bears, then Tampa Bay, then Illinois as a college head coach, and then the Houston Texans. I guess he spent a year with the Houston Texans as a defensive coordinator, so he wasn't a head coach the entire time. But that would be worth considering. Now, Lovie Smith is known for the Tampa 2 defense, which is at the time that Lovie Smith was fired in 2012, and remember Leslie Frazier was fired a year later. At the time, that kind of defensive setup was out of vogue. Teams had learned how to beat it. Now we're kind of back into these cover 2 looks. But, a lot of these guys like Leslie Frazier, Alan Williams, Lovie Smith, a lot of these guys don't do Tampa 2 stuff anymore. They might do cover 2. They might do cover 6. They've been adapting their defense to the offenses that they're playing against as opposed to playing fairly stable base coverages. So Lovie Smith as a defensive coordinator, again, would you like to see in the Viking staff? Not is it realistic? Lovie Smith as a defensive coordinator would also, I think, be a pretty interesting one. But if I have to pick one that was fired on Black Monday, I think it would be Lovie Smith. If I had to pick one that was fired in general, I think it'd be Frank Reich.
Also from Luke Braun, for next time you talk to Justice, ask him what it's like to no longer employ the head coach with the highest active winning percentage.
So the highest active winning percentage in the NFL belongs to Kevin O'Connell with a career winning percentage of .765. The Matt LaFleur at 712 was that was his favorite stat, that Matt LaFleur had the highest winning percentage of any active head coach. And he would abuse statistics to get there, right? He'd say, Belichick would need to win his next 150 games to catch up to Matt LaFleur, ignoring, of course, that LaFleur was probably going to lose some games in the interim. So Matt LaFleur would need to win his next 16 games in order to catch up to Kevin O'Connell in winning percentage. He'd need to win 16 straight to match where Kevin O'Connell is now. Bill Belichick would need to win 197. Andy Reid would need to win 204. So there's your stat.
It is rather impressive, and it's good to be able to hold things over Justice's head.
Yes.
Vignesh asks, now that the Packers have won their Super Bowl by beating the Vikings, as well as the DVOA and estimated wins Super Bowl, what's the next Super Bowl Peter Bukowski is going to have the Packers win?
What's amazing is that the Packers definitely did not win the DVOA Super Bowl or the estimated wins Super Bowl. The Packers are like 12th in DVOA and 18th in estimated wins. They barely, quote unquote, should have made the playoffs in that way. So it's more DVOA participant, right? My DVOA is better than yours. That's the trophy.
Is that like the Colts and their banner? Okay.
Yeah. So they can hang up the DVOA participant pendant. But yeah, I mean, it very much seemed like the way the Packers were responding certainly seemed like their Super Bowl, right? The way the Packers fans have been talking about it, the way the Packers talked about it, certainly seemed like their Super Bowl, which leaves us in a very interesting spot, James, with the linear Super Bowl trophy. So There's a couple of things and this is as good as place as any to litigate this. There's a couple of things I wanted to discuss about the linear Super Bowl. First, we may have resolved, but I don't remember if we resolved what happens if the Packers beat the Vikings in a split series and the Packers win second, right? So if the Packers win second, the Vikings lose their linear Super Bowl trophy. But the Packers, the whole conceit, right, is that the Packers do not care about winning regular season games. And so they care about their rings. They have real Super Bowl aspirations. And so for them, it's not their Super Bowl. So does the Lombardi evaporate? Does that linear Super Bowl trophy evaporate if it goes from the Vikings to the Packers, or is it part of that carried Super Bowl trophy?
Now, most years, your analysis would be absolutely correct, spot on.
Yes, this year I believe would be an exception. Yes, but that is, I just wanted to ask, generally, given the conceit of this, would it normally evaporate?
Normally, it would just be absorbed back in with the Packers' history. Yes,
right, and so so I would say that linear Super Bowl trophy disappears from the ether, but only if it goes from Vikings to Packers. If the Packers beat somebody that beat the Vikings, they pick it up, right? It's only a Vikings to Packers transfer where it evaporates. So it actually doesn't happen all that often. Now, this year is different.
Yes.
One reason, of course, is that the Packers were treating this win over the Vikings, both the Packers and Packers fans, like their Super Bowl. And when you engage in such petty regular season behavior, right? If you're regular season brained, that is how the linear Super Bowls appear.
That is correct. And that is exactly why the trophy continued, and the trophy is retired for the season with the Detroit Lions.
Second question. The Detroit Lions, in an endearing way, I think, won their Super Bowl by playing their hearts out in a game that, quote unquote, does not matter. This game mattered more to the Lions than a game that mattered for the Atlanta Falcons 6 weeks ago, right? This game mattered in a way that it would not for a team actually in the playoff race multiple weeks ago. Teams have checked out while still in the hunt in a way that the Lions, teams that have seeds to play, the Vikings had seeding to play for and checked out of that Bears game, right? The Rams kind of had something sort of to play for and checked out of that game. The Lions were the most locked in team for this weekend, right? I think we can all agree they were the most locked in team this weekend. They wanted to win this game because winning is good. Only reason. I would want to win them a non-derogatory, or award them a non-derogatory, you won your Super Bowl trophy.
So you want to award them something in addition to?
Yes, so they would have 2 Lombardis. So they would pick up the Packers Super Bowl from the Week 17 game, right? So they have that one. But they also won their Super Bowl by keeping the Packers out of the playoffs because they could. So that's 2 Super Bowl trophies.
That would end up creating 2 Super Bowls, to which the Packers could say to the Lions, congratulations on winning your Super Bowl. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say this qualifies.
I think so. But here's the thing that makes this one special. Packers fans can say to Lions fans, congrats on winning your Super Bowl. And Lions fans would say, thank you. That's the difference.
That is the key on that. It's the making the insult and well, you're welcome. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yes, we did, ridiculous. And I feel good. That's what the Lions would say.
Let's go to Bob the Bull Sharif, who asks, for a Reefs remembering the important things in life corner, which of the following is objectively the funniest? The Packers being swept this season by the Lions. Swept. Didn't even split the series. Rodgers' last pass of the season and possibly of his Packers career being an arm punt to a safety who had already picked him off twice. Or that the Packers didn't even get to lose embarrassingly to the 49ers in the playoffs this year because they got taken out by the Detroit Lions, the team with nothing to play for but for spite.
The Lions, by the way, best record in the division in divisional games, 5-1. Man, a bunch of great candidates here. So I think it would still have been funnier in isolation, right, if the Packers got blown out by the 49ers again, right? I think that would have been an extremely funny event. And the knowledge that the Lions saved them from that is funny, but not as funny as that actually happening. So I will say that. But God, Rodgers' last pass of the season, that one's good, right? And maybe of his career. Okay, if he retired, like if it's the last pass of his career, I don't think it is. But if it is the last pass of his career, that becomes the funniest thing. He had been trying to throw a pick to Kirby Joseph all night. All night. He threw 3. Kirby Joseph finally obliged. He was like, no, you were my favorite player when I was growing up. That's a thing he said, by the way. My favorite player when I was growing up. I was a Packers fan, cheered for the Packers. Aaron Rodgers, my favorite player. I could not do this to you. Drops it twice. All right, looks like you have it would be rude. We're in the Midwest. It would be rude for me to reject a gift a third time. It's only polite for me to reject the gift the first 2 times. We're in the Midwest. But a third time, I think we've triggered the phrase, it's time for me to catch this gift. And so that being the last one of his career would be funny. Last one of the season is good. Last one of the career. Yeah. Packers being swept by the Lions, funny. I think I want to separate the 49ers playoff potential loss from the Detroit having nothing to play for but spite. The fact that you lost to a team that had nothing to play for, and you had everything to play for, right? Consecutive playoff appearances, greatest quarterback in NFL history, only 1 ring with him, and he got beaten by a Lions team, the downtrodden in the division. The fact that the Aaron Rodgers said the last 2 games of the season are probably going to be the easiest, right? Because they were at home. That's the funniest. That to me is that the Lions had nothing to play for.
To me, it has to do with that stat I brought up during the Green Bay preview, where we talked about the only quarterback to have ever beaten Aaron Rodgers twice in a season was Brett Favre. And that's not the case anymore.
Oh, no!
That's not the case anymore, is it? Jared freaking Goff gets to add his name to that mantle. And that, friends, is the funniest outcome of all of this. The little quarterback that nobody wanted that got traded for Matthew Stafford after burning.
He was paired with the first round pick. That's like you were the throw-in.
Yep, you were the throw-in. The QB nobody wanted. It turns into a Paul Harvey thing, and now you know the rest of the story. That little quarterback that nobody wanted is among 2 quarterbacks who ever beat Aaron Rodgers twice in the regular season.
That's so good, man.
That's so funny. Logan Bolsharif asks,
God.
Sorry, there's a revolution happening on the Discord. For a Reefs draft corner, it seems to me that commentators, etc., describe busts the same, even when circumstances are different. Example, I think it's fair to say Treadwell, Rager, Rosen are busts, but they are often lumped in with players who suffer constant or catastrophic injuries, like Sharif Floyd, Matt Khalil, and possibly Andrew Booth and Lewis Seen. Do you think this is fair? How would you describe a draft bust?
Sometimes they're lumped in. I don't know if I see it all the time like that, but they would get lumped in if you're doing like some kind of crude statistical analysis where you're not really, you're just trying to figure out something quickly instead of trying to figure out, kind of how often a team makes a bad pick and so on. So there are instances where I think that actually this year is a really good example of that, where I think it makes sense to discuss injuries as part of the reason that you can correctly consider someone a bust. Andrew Booth, I think, is a really good example of someone who, if he continues to be injured, would, I think, justifiably be considered a bad pick for the Vikings because his injury history was very well known heading in. The Vikings made the pick knowing what the risk was, and they got bitten, right? And that's that's just what it is. With Sharif Floyd, that's not the case. He did not have a history of injuries, as far as I remember. Did not have a history of injuries when he was drafted, and his injuries were not in any way predictable, right? Like he had suffered some kind of hamstring injury, if I remember correctly, then goes under surgery, and the surgeon nicks his nerve, right? And so that hamstring can no longer fire. Well, that has nothing to do with the Vikings draft evaluation of injury potential. But and so I would not include Sharif Floyd as a bust there. Part of the draft evaluation is to evaluate the risk of injury, whether that includes, actual, instances of durability concerns, materializing, right? Like, having multiple injuries in college, or concerns about a player's build, right? So Teddy had skinny knees. Oh God, fast forward 6 years later, what happened? Or trying to figure out like, hey, this is a smaller player. He's going to take a lot of hits. I'm concerned about his injuries long-term. Or, hey, the way that this player runs routes puts a lot of stress on his knees in ways that I think will turn into injury. He may not have an injury history. He may not even have build concerns, but the way that he plants his foot, right, is something that's ingrained into the way that he runs. That's an injury concern, right? So some of these injury concerns may be predictable in a way that we don't know, but if we don't know, we can't put it into our evaluation. So I would suggest that maybe Matt Khalil was one of those guys where there were actual injury concerns despite being durable in college. But I don't know that. I can't say that was a known fact, especially among NFL front offices. So for now, I would lump him in with Sharif Floyd. But Andrew Booth certainly is in the area where part of his potential bust profile was injuries, right? So sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's not. It also kind of depends on what you're attempting to communicate when you talk about draft busts. If you say, man, this team really could not take advantage of their window because none of their picks worked out, they had a bunch of draft busts, then yeah, I mean, the Titans had a draft bust with Isaiah Wilson and potentially Caleb Farley, right? A couple of first-round picks that didn't work out, and now they're kind of out underneath it in terms of the cap. Or not in terms of the cap, but just, they're not in the playoffs and they don't know what to do with Taylor Lewan, and it's a difficult situation for them. Then you can kind of evaluate kind of what went wrong and say, hey, here's some draft busts. But if you're attempting to determine whether or not the general manager made a series of good or bad decisions, you need to parse those out when you talk about draft busts. And you need to say, hey, Rick Spielman did not you would have to make the argument that, the Matt Khalil pick was not a bad one for Rick. I don't know if that's true, but because he only played well-ish his rookie year, right? I would not at the time have argued that he deserved to make the Pro Bowl. I believe he did end up making the Pro Bowl, but he played pretty well, right? Not as well as Darrisaw played in small stretches last year, but he played pretty well. And then he did not play very well after that. And I think that there is some evidence that he's had knee problems going all the way back to his second year, but I think it only goes back to his third year. I don't remember completely. In either case, maybe the talent was misevaluated, maybe not. Treadwell, absolutely, right? That he broke his leg, and they just assumed he would return to the kind of health and athleticism that he had before. He did not. He did not have that athleticism that he had when he was a 5-star recruit in college. So it really depends on if you're trying to evaluate a general manager, if you're trying to evaluate what went wrong, if you're trying to evaluate kind of whether or not a team has a history of making bad decisions one way or the other. So it really depends on what the purpose is in calling someone or something a draft bust. Now, if you're attempting to talk about a player specifically and talk about, the blame a player takes or whatever, or, most of the time when we talk about draft busts and we say somebody's a draft bust, we are directing some level of distaste towards the player, which is a little bit unfair. Most players are attempting to be good at football, and the fact that they aren't is just a product of life. It's just circumstance. But if you're mad about Isaiah Wilson and you're a Titans fan, that's pretty fair. Mad about Henry Ruggs and you're a Raiders fan, pretty fair. But mad at Jalen Reagor, maybe. He had focus issues. Now he's just not playing well, and I don't think he has focus issues, so I don't know what it is. Mad at Josh Rosen, maybe, probably not. But it really depends on what your purpose is in describing somebody as a draft bust.
Also from Logan Bolsharif, for James and Arif's parenting corner, my wife gave birth last week. When can I start pitting my 2-year-old against the newborn?
I feel like you don't got to do anything. Those are emergent rivalries that will appear for you.
Yeah, that you'll know when the time is right. It's coming.
Yeah.
This will come naturally. Beef Brewski asks, I know they're underdogs, but what do you think Seattle will need to do to beat the 49ers? Are there any areas where they have a distinct advantage?
This is bait, right? This is like I answer this question and you accuse me of being a Seahawks fan for knowing the answer.
I disagree.
Even though I am a national writer now. The Pro Football Network hired me to cover the whole league. So I'm supposed to know these things now, and it's not my fault for knowing them.
No, and in fact, this is a situation where it would behoove you to know this, because if the 49ers lose, then the Vikings end up, moving up and getting an additional home game if they end up winning. So kind of is sort of important for you to know it.
It was already important as somebody who covers the Vikings, and now it's definitely important as somebody who covers the league. So I just want to say, answering this question is not in any way an indicator that I was ever a Seahawks fan, because I wasn't. Not a Seahawks fan now, wasn't a Seahawks fan before, will not be a Seahawks fan in the future. So just want to put that out there. Did the Seahawks have some level of advantage over the 49ers? I believe the 49ers are like 14.5 point favorites or something like that last I checked. Certainly not in a wonderful situation top to bottom. The Seahawks do have a better quarterback, I guess, with Geno Smith over Brock Purdy. This is another situation where I see really consistent, somewhat high-level play from a guy whose priors tell us is probably not a good quarterback. But that's true for both of them, right? With Brock Purdy, I would say that the priors are stronger because he is both a rookie and in the last year of his deal. And also we have seen Shanahan just do this with quarterbacks, which is what made the Trey Lance pick so intriguing. It's just like, you could just like manufacture production, man. What's going on? Why are we doing this? Seems like it's the case. But CJ Beathard eventually kind of fell out. Nick Mullins eventually kind of fell out. It's not always something that you can rely on. And there's a reason that he was done with Jimmy, right? There's just stuff that you can't do, and at some point you want to be able to do it. Brock Purdy, so I mentioned on, I think it was on the podcast with Trey Wingo, that like Purdy is a fairly limited quarterback. He's not going to get you a bunch of big plays. A bunch of 49ers fans I shouldn't say a bunch, a couple of 49ers fans got a little bit upset with me because they're like, I feel like the playbook is larger with Brock Purdy. I think that you're not as restricted as you are with Jimmy. I think that he's got a stronger arm. And maybe he has a stronger arm, but certainly his release isn't nearly as quick as Jimmy's. And that is a really important element because when players cannot anticipate the throw, because the release time allows them time to react and the ability to anticipate the throw. When the players cannot anticipate the throw, they have a difficult time getting to the ball, and they cannot enable as many yards after the catch. Now, Brock Purdy has a lower yards average depth of target than Jimmy Garoppolo and a much lower percentage of passes that go over 20 yards. People just remember a couple from his early starts where he threw deep, and so they think that he is a quarterback that's got the ability to consistently do that. But he didn't do that at Iowa State, and he's not doing it now. He's a more limited quarterback, and I think at some point the bottom's going to fall out from under him, and that's the concern. The problem is the 49ers are better almost everywhere else. I would still take the Seahawks receiver group over the 49ers receiver group, and I do think that is it Shane Waldron still? Yeah. I do think that Shane Waldron is a pretty underrated offensive coordinator. He's doing a really good job there, but overall, the offensive design, you give that to Shanahan. I think that the offensive line, despite how well those rookies are playing in Seattle at tackle, both Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas, I would probably give it to the 49ers, even though they've got an injury over at guard, right? I would say that at running back, you got to give it to the 49ers, despite how much people probably like Kenneth Walker. I mean, he's basically a lock for Offensive Rookie of the Year, right? On the defensive side, the Seahawks have a couple of emerging stars, and the 49ers have stars everywhere, right? They've got Nick Bosa up front, and Samson Ebukam is playing really well at edge rusher. Javon Kinlaw is doing all right, probably should be better. Eric Armstead is doing really well on the defensive line, right? Fred Warner is the best linebacker in football. Dre Greenlaw, if he's healthy enough to play, I believe he will be, is a top 10 linebacker. They've got, really great linebacker play. Jordan Brooks is very good, and I, missed on that. I was wrong about Jordan Brooks, but he's on IR. I don't know if he's going to be activated from IR. You're left with Cody Barton, Tanner Muse, and that's an issue, right? At cornerback, again, emerging stars, Tariq Woolen, Kobe Bryant. It looked like Tariq Woolen got hurt for a little bit, if I remember correctly, in the last game, but I think that he's going to be healthy for the playoffs. I don't remember. And you've got Quandre Diggs at safety. Quandre Diggs is very good. Talanoa Hufanga is better. You're getting really good play at cornerback from like Jimmy Ward's playing in the nickel. Travarius Ward is playing really well at outside corner. You're getting reasonable production at the other outside corner spot, depending on kind of who's playing there. They're just better, basically, the entire roster. If Seattle is going to win, I think it's going to be through explosive plays that challenge, that try to get the ball out quickly, right? Because it's a really good defensive line, but find ways to challenge, if it's Diamador Lenore out there, that guy, if, for whatever reason, it's Ambry Thomas, if he's healthy out there, that guy, but challenge that outside corner with DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett, because those are really good receivers. But I think that's the only way Seattle can do it. It's tough. The running game is really good. The offensive line is really good. And I don't know that the Seattle defensive line is just going to be able to keep up. So, 14.5 point favorites. I guess it would probably just happen through explosive plays and high variance play. And Quandre Diggs, maybe if you get to interception or two.
It is good that for for Pro Football Network's setup and everything, that you had all this knowledge of Seattle before coming on.
I had, the reason they hired me is because I had knowledge of nearly every team in the league already. That happens to also include Seattle.
It does include Seattle. It just seems to apply to Seattle more, but we'll deal with that later.
I don't.
Bull Sharif Floyd asks, for James and Arif's surrealism and Donald Glover corner. In 2016, Donald Glover described his, at the time, new show on FX titled Atlanta as being Twin Peaks with rappers, a reference to David Lynch's surreal and unsettling hit television show that premiered in 1990 due to the surreal nature of the show itself. I promise this comes around. Nearly 6.5 years and 4 seasons of Atlanta later, the show has come to an end, leaving with the title Twin Peaks with, vacant and without an appropriate owner. Due to the surreal nature of the games and moments that have taken place during the 2022 and 2023 through 2023 Vikings season, do you think it would be fair to describe this year's Vikings team as being, quote, Twin Peaks with football players? If not, which team deserves this description? Also, which current Vikings player is most likely to beat Michael Vick in a street foot race?
All right, so I believe there's probably, I'm going to double check to see if he's on the roster because I got corrected on it. So he's on the practice squad. Dan Chisena could beat Michael Vick in a foot race. Outright, period. No, I don't have to walk that back. Michael Vick, very fast, would probably be very competitive in college track. Dan Chisena won an indoor NCAA track championship as part of a relay team. He's fast. He's faster. The only reason he can't play football. The only reason he's on the roster is because he's fast. The next closest would be Kene Wangu. I don't think that he could, but he'd be the closest. Which team would be Twin Peaks with football? Probably the Indianapolis Colts, right? That's a surreal team.
Yeah, this year it's the Colts. Typically, that sort of thing, oddly enough, I feel would go to the Falcons because the Falcons just have weird things happen to them.
Yeah,
But
I think that's
not,
fair.
But not this year. This year has been pretty normal and disappointing.
pretty normal, comma disappointing. Also
Yes.
normal.
Let's go to Dusty, who asks, name a better movie with 5 words or more in the title than Big Trouble in Little China.
Okay, so James and I did not tell each other our answers for this. I wanted to pick a movie that I think could compete, but mostly would tick Dusty off. An American Tale, Fievel Goes West.
See, yours is actually halfway decent. That's funny. I wasn't expecting that. When you said a movie that would upset Dusty, my first thought was, oh my god, you're going to break out Rise of Skywalker, aren't you?
No, Rise of Skywalker was awful. Star Wars: The Force Awakens. I don't think it's bad. I think it's good. I don't think it's better than Big Trouble in Little China. That's a good ass movie.
I was going to go with Don't Be a Menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood.
Oh, wow. Wow.
If only for the occasional appearance of the mailman, Keenan Ivory Wayans, occasionally walking around and going, message. There's so many hilarious lines in the movie, and it's a snapshot of, you know, anybody who was really like into In Living Color when they were a kid, which I was. It's that, and it's very it doesn't hold up at all anymore. But the scene with the dancing grandmas is still hilarious to me. So I put that out on Discord, and he absolutely did not think that that movie was appropriate for his answer. And I don't know what to tell you, but it's my show now. So
what about The Naked Gun 2.5: The Smell of Fear?
Man, that's a superior movie.
Yeah, I think that beats
good.
both of ours. Yeah,
that is quite good.
And Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult was phenomenal.
I like. I
don't think it's as
good. The first two were better than the third.
Yeah. Also, does 33 1/3 also have O.J. Simpson?
They all
2.5 has O.J. Simpson.
Yes, 2.5 has, the first movie has O.J. Simpson getting run over by the marching band at the end of the movie. Which, boy, that's you could just rewatch that all day long. Let's go to, oh my god, there's a reference to this from a Patreon bonus episode. A second jet has hit Drew Bledsoe. For the universe where the Packers make the playoffs, what alternative information could we give Rodgers that would convince him that if he plays in San Fran, the deep state will assassinate him? And for the world where the Packers lose, what player/players will need to be sacrificed on Pat McAfee's show for Rodgers to be satisfied?
For you to understand the username, you're going to have to listen to the Patreon episode, which of course means I'm telling you that the only way you're going to be able to access this information is by paying us. Not unusual for my career, having worked for paywalled companies, but that's just the only way you're going to get that reference. I saw this username and I died laughing because famously I never remember what I say on the show. And that reminded me of a thing I said on the show. And I could not do show prep for the next 10 minutes. I find my own jokes endlessly hilarious, more than anybody else does, in part because I don't ever remember saying them. And so when I encounter them in the wild, I'm like, wow, this guy who said this, comedian. He's really got it. He understands it.
Nobody loves a reef more than a reef.
That's true. That's been well established. Chelsea used to love the Christmas episodes, but she's just started hating me listening to them because she's like, a reef, I hear you enough already. And it's really uncomfortable when you find a joke that you said funnier than I do.
Wow, I'd say there's a level of vanity, but I listen to the Christmas episodes too. So
All right. So So this is a split question, obviously asked before the Packers lost against the Lions. But for the universe where the Packers make the playoffs, what's the alternative information could we give Rodgers that convince him that if he plays in San Fran, the deep state will assassinate him? And if they lose, which players will be sacrificed to McAfee for Rodgers to be satisfied? Obviously, the Packers have lost. The most recent goats, I think, the scapegoats that Rodgers would choose are probably Romeo Dubs, right? Because he did not play well against the Lions. I'd
Despite
say,
Justice declaring that he was Hall of Fame worthy
yeah, he wanted to give him the gold jacket in the preseason. If I remember.
immediately, yes.
Yeah, and which that was the kiss of death, right? And probably Quay Walker, I think, is going to be up there. Those probably are probably way up there. Now Christian Watson is out of the doghouse, so that's important. And who did Zach Tom replace? Joshua Nijman. I think that's the third player that needs to be sacrificed. As for the hypothetical scenario that we don't have to worry about, what information would we give Rodgers that if he plays in San Francisco? Just tell him that San Francisco is run by a bunch of deep state liberals and that they're aware that he's coming. That's all you have to say.
Yeah. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
Also,
they've got vaccines and they're unafraid to use them.
Let's stay on this for a moment. For cold weather planning, LaFleur said that he hated the cold until Rodgers said, quote, "Our words are spells," end quote. I was trying to get the magic stuff out, but literally this is what he said. This is a quote from an article. What sort of spell or witchcraft could have warmed up LaFleur?
He said this. Kevin Clark tweeted it out. It's from an article. This is a thing that he believes. What does Peter Griffin on Family Guy say? It insists upon itself.
It insists upon itself. That's why he doesn't like the Godfather movie, which he's never finished. But he said he hates the Godfather because it insists upon itself.
So I mostly don't like Family Guy, but the moments that are pretty good are pretty killer. And this is one where Peter is obviously he's making fun of movie critics for being inscrutable about the way that they review movies, right? And that is a great example of it. But the magic stuff is insisting upon itself to us in a very real and tangible way. The more we run away from it, the more it is something that must be confronted in the way that we cover football. It's obnoxious. But also that the Packers are quarterbacked by a Hall of Fame New Age nut. That is going to make this a consistent problem for us. Rodgers, of course, is referring to his belief in mind over matter, which to some extent is true. Technically, all of our sensations that we experience are things that we perceive, which makes them in our mind in a very, I guess, kind of sense. So, getting bothered by the cold is a fact of getting bothered. And you can, through focus, get around that. And to Rodgers, that means our words are spells. In a very upsetting sequence of events, a couple of Packers people have said, in frustration, have responded with words are spells to me. And I was like, is this a Packers reference I'm missing, or is this just kind of like an Aaron Rodgers thing? I would say this out of frustration too if I had heard it. And I Googled it, and it led me to a website, sisterhood.org, something like that, Spirit Sisterhood. I don't even remember anymore. But the first line of the blog was, there's a reason it's called spelling, because words are spells.
I hate this even more now. Oh my god.
And the worst thing is, I did decide in my frustration at seeing the very first line of this, I didn't even read the rest of it. The very first line, I did decide to look up the etymology of both spelling, as in spelling a word, and spell, as in cast a spell. And they are, very unfortunately, the same etymology. The process, as far as I can tell anyway, I'm not a word researcher. is it etymologist? That's got to be it, right? Etymologist. It sounds too much like entomologist, but I'm not an etymologist. But from my understanding and my basic cursory research, 10 seconds before we hit record, yeah, it comes from a root word in Latin, spellam. I'm obviously pronouncing that incorrectly, but no one actually knows how to pronounce Latin. Stow it. I just say to the imaginary listener who has Latin opinions. But that moved in two directions, both in terms of weaving an enchantment and in terms of outlining how a word is constructed. They have a very similar etymology. Very frustrating that this throwaway line at the beginning of a blog was correct. So in a sense that I don't believe Aaron Rodgers meant, he is technically correct. The worst kind of correct.
In this case, yes. God, just the entire tweet, which we'll have linked in the show notes over at the Daily Norseman, he is talking in a way that just makes me want to punch him.
Yeah, like James sent this to me to give us context for this question. And I read the little image preview that gets sent in our Google chat when you send a tweet. And I was like, oh, this is bad. And then I clicked on it, and it just got worse every time. It just got worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yep. That's just what Aaron Rodgers does. He just ruins things. It's science. Jesse from Brooklyn, who won the original Hell League this year.
Congrats.
As the king of hell for the next year, I can use my powers for good or evil. I can either get the Vikings to the Super Bowl, because let's be honest, even the winner of the Hell League doesn't have the power to promise a win, or I can ban Luke Braun, Don from Ohio, and Justice Mosquito from the internet and social media for a year. Which would you prefer?
Unhesitatingly, the second. Not a question.
Boy.
You could have dropped one of those names and I still would have picked that.
What if it was Vikings Super Bowl, or banning those people, or we no longer have to cover Magic on the show?
I'm going to take the ban, but that is tough.
Don from Ohio asks, what made Arif happier, NDSU losing or the Seahawks making the playoffs?
Okay, I have no particular regard one way or the other regarding the Seahawks. I believe I covered that, not just in this episode, but many times. As for NDSU losing, look, it's not about North Dakota State. I've just been a Jackrabbits fan for so long. Really love the team the South Dakota State Jackrabbits put together. Played with a lot of heart, almost as much as the Lions, a lot of grit. An incredible performance, really ran away with it. I mean, NDSU didn't even have a chance entering the fourth quarter, when they stick up their four fingers for the fourth quarter as if they've invented that. Yeah, man, you can count to four. Really fantastic. Great education you're getting at North Dakota State. The aviation school's an hour up the road.
I did have a nice moment yesterday evening where I had to ask you if this was your Twitter burner account. Where somebody had 3 images. One was the score of the NDSU South Dakota game. One was Vikings Packers, and the other was, I believe, the Lions and the Packers. So it was like the Bears Vikings, and then Lions Packers. I was like, this is your burner account, isn't it? Just admit it that this is your burner account.
I do have burner accounts. They are extremely poorly hidden. That is not one of them.
For whatever reason, whenever I'm supposed to tag you on Twitter likes to send me the Arif Hassan in jail
really
account.
God,
I have no idea
old.
why.
I don't even know how to log into that one anymore.
You used to be able to get into Twitter jail if you tweeted too much.
Right. No,
No, I'm saying for the listener is that this is something that used to exist. And as a result, sometimes Arif had to tweet from Twitter jail.
Yeah,
but
it was just my Twitter avatar, but with bars in front of it, jail bars. But yeah, like there was like a rate limit. Like if you send too many tweets in a single day, they're like, all right, you can't post for like 12 hours or whatever. And I was like, I still have more stuff to say. I'm sorry.
You can't silence me. I'm in jail. I'm a political prisoner. And then you could subscribe to that one.
Yeah. But they got rid of the rate limiter a while ago. So cool. I'm sure in 5 years, Elon will take credit for it. But yeah, the South Dakota State Jackrabbits sent Cam Miller and Hunter Lipke packing. Good.
Two names you definitely knew at the beginning of this episode.
Okay, I have long hated Hunter Lipke.
For Arif and James's Green Bay Packers quarterback retirement playbook corner, Aaron Rodgers is acting just like Brett Favre at the end of his career as a Packers quarterback, including throwing an interception for his last pass. He's saying all the right things about, quote, retirement, including turning down $58 million next year, and in all his actions by turning down a jersey swap and putting his arm around Cobb on the way to the locker room for all to see. What are the next few steps Rodgers will do before he makes his grandiose to the Packers? It's a grandiose thing. Before he makes things for the Packers much more difficult. And what illegal multi-million-dollar scam does he have to set up to turn down $58 million next year if he does indeed retire?
That's incredible. Okay, so first I would say, I can't believe you turned down the jersey swap, man. That's so petty. So I think that for him to kind of finish the Favre arc, as it were, throwing an interception as his last pass is just such a good moment there. That's a good addition. Is that he needs to be traded to the Jets, who do need a quarterback, who do have some connections to Aaron Rodgers, including Mike LaFleur being the offensive coordinator, brother of Matt LaFleur. They run a very similar offense. They have a good offensive line and nearly great receiving core. Really fantastic work that Garrett Wilson's doing over there, and a very good defense to work with. He needs to do that, and in the first 10 games or so of the season, play lights out, and then in the next 7 games, absolutely crap the bed. And then, after that, Kirk Cousins' contract will be up. Just going to put that out there. And we'll see what happens after that. As for what multi-million-dollar scam, I don't believe that he will, in the spirit of Brett Favre, defraud the state, or more pointedly, defraud people in poverty who need the money and are legally entitled to it. I think instead he will be involved somehow in a crypto scheme, even though those are probably dead after several Bitcoin crashes and the FTX problem. If you don't know what that is, God bless you. But yeah, I mean, it seems like crypto scams are probably waning, but I feel like that's the one. Like Drew Brees has the Advocare scam. Brett Favre has the defrauding the state out of $58 million or whatever. Tom Brady has TB12. I think Aaron Rodgers has holistic medicine and crypto.
I'd like to think that he's going to get busted for being the bank, being the financier of some drug swapping website on the dark web. I feel like this is possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Let's end with Nolan Kaler, who is not taking us to North Code this episode, but instead is taking us to Cambridge. For James and Arif's Occult Corner, I took in Sunday's win at the 730 Tavern in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The atmosphere was great, the food was lovely, and it couldn't have been more fun. It almost seemed too good to be true. When I walked out of the bar, I noticed a peculiar store across the street, 7 Stars, Crystals, and Books, which specializes in, quote, metaphysical literature. I have no choice but to conclude, based on this and past events, that the occult community are onto the Vikings, that Norse code has inadvertently discovered something. My questions are numerous, but for now, where will the 7 stars appear next in the story of the 2022 Vikings? Will Kirk's grill contain a not-so-secret ingredient? Will the 7 stars possess someone? Or will they bring torrential rains to the Meadowlands and continue to allow the Vikings to believe that they are a team of destiny?
All right, so we were given a couple of links here, including to 7-Star Spirits. So I read this. In Korean cosmology, the constellation known in the West as the Big Dipper or the Great Bear is instead understood as 7 brothers, known as the 7-Star Spirits. The 7 stars are petitioned for fertility, easy childbirth, healthy babies and children, the birth of sons, prosperity, abundance, wealth, longevity and good health, and virility. Now, reading this, I was concerned. The first thing that came to mind, the birth of sons. Now, what player in the league is a son of a Vikings legend? I'm not talking about Thaddeus Moss. Duron Carter's not even in the league. I'm talking about Antoine Winfield Jr. I am worried that Antoine Winfield Jr. will pick off it could, I guess, be this year, right? The Buccaneers are technically in the playoffs. Could pick off the Vikings' best chances this year, next year, the year after, in the playoffs, best chances of making the Super Bowl. I believe that it'll be a curse of the 7-Star Spirits, and I believe it'll be the son of a Vikings legend. I believe Antoine Winfield Jr., who the Vikings should have drafted. I already forget over who. Will end a Vikings postseason run. That's the concern.
I just think this whole thing is ridiculous, and the fact that we opened up the occult corner one more time because it was Aaron Rodgers' fault is reason enough why we
that's bad.
Yeah, brings nothing but pain. Just punch him right there, just right there. That's gonna be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So I've got a bunch of coaching profiles over at Pro Football Network. If you are, for whatever reason, interested in, say, D'Amico Ryan's coaching profile, or Gerard Mayo coaching profile, or Leslie Frazier coaching profile, I wrote all of those over at Pro Football Network. You can also find, I've got a winners and losers of Black Monday. Obviously, all the coaches who got fired, their staffs and their families, those would all be considered quote unquote losers, but I wanted to kind of expand beyond, who those people are and talk about the teams and players in the coaching carousel game, as well as a GM or two that you would consider to be a winner or a loser in that circumstance. So that's over at Pro Football Network. I also have a really quick first look at the playoff preview. So if you just really want a quick breakdown of any of the games that are happening in Wildcard Weekend, I've got that up, and I'll have a more in-depth column coming soon that'll pick against the spread. So that's over at Pro Football Network.
So that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We will be previewing the Giants game and the rest of the playoffs next episode, so looking forward to that. But for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much. And please remember that this is not sustainable. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.